This will be a great victory depending upon what we do with it. In other words, we win elections not simply for the purpose of beating the other party or the other person, but to get the opportunity to do good things for our country. And the next 4 years will be the time that we will try to make ourselves worthy of this victory. As far as the tapes are concerned, rather than being in defiance of the law, I am in compliance with the law. As far as what goes through my mind, I would simply say that I intend to continue to carry out to the best of my ability the responsibilities I was elected to carry out last November.
Just a year after that great election victory, Richard Nixon is now perceived by an increasing number of Americans to be unworthy of the mandate. And so there is tonight a real, persistent, and substantial question of whether the president can, in fact, carry out his responsibilities.
This is a CBS News special report, The Embattled President, with CBS News correspondent Roger Mudd.
Richard Nixon's future as the President of the United States has now apparently moved beyond his control. Despite his own considerable powers as chief executive, his future is really in the hands of the other two branches of government, the courts and the Congress. The federal courts have uncovered a bizarre system of handling the tape recordings of the president's meetings and phone calls, carelessly stored and checked in and out in a strange fashion. And now, further straining credulity, the White House says 2 of the tapes never existed. On Capitol Hill, the House Judiciary Committee has started a formal inquiry into whether it should approve the impeachment of the president. The Senate Judiciary Committee is hearing proposals that would shift control of the Watergate investigation from the White House to a court-appointed prosecutor who could investigate the president himself. The Senate Rules Committee is now questioning House Republican leader Gerald Ford as if he would soon be president, demanding answers on executive privilege, on releasing documents, on obstructing justice, on his personal finances, on his medical and health records. The public opinion polls, always a revered source of comfort and pleasure for the president, have now turned sour. A year ago, Gallup said 68% approved Mr. Nixon. Yesterday, the figure fell to 27%. And during this past week, the president began hearing the clamor to resign on the editorial pages of his friendliest publishers in Denver, in Atlanta, in Detroit. Added to this domestic firestorm, the president also was involved with a dangerous military confrontation in the Middle East, which carries the potential of a face-off between the United States and the Soviet Union. But the man closest to the president, Alexander Haig, insisted in an interview with Dan Rather this morning that Mr. Nixon is working efficiently and has no intention of resigning.
I can assure you there is no consideration being given to the president's resignation by any of us, by him, and by those of us that are carrying out official responsibilities for the government at this time. And it's just not a question that is taking any of our time or thought. Our objective and the president's objective is to continue the tasks that the American people have charged us with. And that's precisely what we're going to do. And I think the American people can be confident that in that sense, the government is in good hands.
I think you'd agree that it would be extraordinary if, given the pressures of the past 2 to 3 weeks, there hadn't been some effect on the president as a human being and the people around him, such as yourself. Now, has there been an effect? If so, what is it?
Well, if there's any effect, and I probably could speak better for myself than I can for the president, I'm very conscious of the criticism, and I'm very conscious of the concerns, which incidentally are certainly getting full treatment. If anything, these concerns tend to get my personal juices flowing in a way which generates hyperactivity with respect to the problems of the people. And I think in many respects that's true of the president himself.
Tonight, Barry Goldwater, one of the president's oldest friends who has been sharply critical of Mr. Nixon's conduct on Watergate, called for a period of restraint and reflection to quiet the hysteria about the president. Central to the problems faced by President Nixon is the Watergate tapes and their tangled history. Fred Graham traces that story.
It all began suddenly last July when an obscure former White House official named Alexander Butterfield appeared as a surprise witness before the Senate Watergate Committee.
Mr. Butterfield, are you aware of the installation of any listening devices in the Oval Office of the President?
I was aware of listening devices. Yes, sir.
The committee voted unanimously to ask President Nixon to turn over the tapes. The president replied by letter, "The tapes, which have been under my sole personal control, will remain so. None has been transcribed or made public, and none will be." So on July 23rd, lawyers for the Senate committee appeared at the Executive Office building adjacent to the White House to serve 2 subpoenas upon Richard Nixon through his lawyers. One subpoena for the tapes, another for related documents. Later that day, another subpoena for the tapes was served on the president through his lawyers. This one, a grand jury subpoena obtained by Special Watergate prosecutor Archibald Cox. The case was set for hearing before Judge John Sirica, the strong-minded 69-year-old trial judge who had precipitated the Watergate crisis by refusing to believe that nobody higher up than the original 7 Watergate defendants had been involved. President Nixon stated the reasons for not turning over the tapes that were later to be translated into constitutional arguments.
It is even more important that the confidentiality of conversations between a president and his advisors be protected. This is no mere luxury to be dispensed with whenever a particular issue raises sufficient uproar. It is absolutely essential to the conduct of the presidency in this and in all future administrations.
Judge Sirica ordered the president to surrender the tapes, and the Court of Appeals, in a 5-2 decision, supported Sirica. Both courts said the grand jury needed the tapes to decide which high officials might have been involved in the Watergate break-in and cover-up. Judge Sirica specifically asked for recordings of 9 different conversations, seeking the answers to questions raised by the testimony of witnesses before the Senate Watergate Committee this past summer.
I told Senator Baker, I believe, the other day that Watergate was not discussed at that meeting, and since then I have rechecked what sketchy notes I have, and I find I was in error on that. I'm sure there must have been some discussion of the Watergate with the president on that occasion on the 20th.
I told the president about the fact that there was no money to pay these individuals to meet their demands. He asked me how much it would cost. I told him I could only make an estimate that it might be as high as $1 million or more. He told me that that was no problem. He also looked over at Haldeman and repeated the same statement.
Nixon attempted to end the controversy with a bold stroke. He said he would not appeal to the Supreme Court, then made a compromise offer of summaries of the tapes and fired the special prosecutor for refusing to agree. But a storm of opinion erupted against this, and Nixon's lawyer made a surprise announcement.
I've just informed Judge Sirica that President Nixon will comply in all respects with the order of this court as modified by the Court of Appeals. This president does not defy the law.
The nation barely had time to heave a sigh of relief before lawyers were scurrying into Judge Sirica's court again, this time to confront the most startling development yet in the long story of the tapes. A lawyer for the president, Fred Bazart, declared that it was discovered only last weekend that 2 key conversations were never recorded. He told Judge Sirica that the president's phone call to John Mitchell on June the 20th, their first conversation after Watergate, was placed from a phone that was not bugged, and that when Mr. Nixon had his controversial talk with John Dean on April 15th, the recorder had run out of tape. So there is no way to check the truth of what the Watergate witnesses said about these conversations.
On the 20th of June, when I talked to him, I apologized to him for not knowing what the hell had happened, and I should have kept a stronger hand on what the people in the committee were doing, etc.
I informed the president that I had told the prosecutors of my own involvement and the involvement of others. The president recalled the fact that at one point we had discussed the difficulty in raising money, and that he said that $1 million was nothing to raise to pay to maintain the silence for the defendants. He said that he had, of course, only been joking when he made that comment. The most interesting thing that happened during the conversation was very near the end. He got up out of his chair, went behind the chair to the corner of the Executive Office building office, and in a nearly audible tone said to me,
he was probably foolish to have discussed Hunt's clemency with Colson.
In the hearing before Judge Sirica, White House personnel testified that only one recorder with 6 hours of tape was in operation on the weekend of the Nixon-Dean conversation. And Bazart was able to show that Nixon had been talking with aides for far more than 6 hours before Dean entered the room. But the White House's handling of the tapes and its record-keeping was so sloppy that there was no way to prove the tapes hadn't been destroyed. Records were kept on scraps of paper torn from shopping bags, and nobody had checked to see if tapes loaned to former presidential aide H.R. Haldeman had all been returned. Finally, the president's special assistant, Stephen Bull, testified that he had told Mr. Nixon 5 weeks ago that the 2 tapes could not be found, and as Bull put it, I don't recall any comment by the president in response to that. Judge Sirica's inquiry into the missing tapes still has a week to run. But even before all the facts are in, a revealing pattern has emerged. The weight of the evidence so far is that the 2 conversations probably were not recorded, but that the White House knew of this weeks or even months ago, not last weekend when Mr. Nixon's spokesman told the court and the public the absence was discovered. And it appears to be a measure of Mr. Nixon's troubles that public attention has tended to focus on the holes in the White House's story, not its consistencies. Again and again last week, observers in the courtroom were heard to say, you know, the White House could be telling the truth, but nobody will ever believe it. Fred Graham, CBS News, Washington.